Hello and welcome to Free Play Online. Today we've got the panel Curating for Diversity, Spaces and People. I'd like to thank Free Play's online festival sponsors, Surprise Attack, and for a bit of info about Free Play, we're running all week here in Melbourne, Australia, and we've still got tickets to our symposium at ACME on Sunday, April 19th available. Visit freeplay.net.au for more info. Over to you, Celia.
Thank you. Okay, I guess I'm on screen. I just keep seeing the logo, so I will begin. Is my video showing? I guess so. All right. I'm Celia Pearce. I am the festival chair and co-founder of Indiecade. And I'm going to start with a few slides just to give my background so people can kind of understand the context of how I arrived at the theme of this talk and the subject of this talk. And then I'm going to go through kind of a work in progress that I'm working on of like steps to creating and curating more inclusive cultures. So I'm going to switch over to my slides for a little bit and then I'll go back to the video feed. And also, I just want to say I'm really excited to be part of Free Play and particularly ACME, which has really been a pioneering venue for game art and experimental game activities for a decade or more. And I really find it to be, I'm really honored to be virtually part of an ACME event. Also, what's going to happen is at the end of the talk, we'll have a little Q&A period, and the questions will be taken via Twitter. So if you would like to ask questions, and I'll repeat this when I finish at the end, you can just tweet your questions to pound or hashtag FreePlay15. So I'm going to begin with my presentation here. Let me just bop over to my PowerPoint, and let's go. All right, so the talk is entitled Curating for Diversity, Works, Spaces, and People. As I said, I'm the festival chair and co-founder of Indiecade, and I'm also an associate professor of game design at Northeastern University, which is located in Boston. So I want to open with this quote by Lee Alexander, which many people are familiar with. This article from which this is quoted, which appeared in Gamma Sutra, was kind of the fulcrum for a lot of controversy and issues that came up around diversity in game design last year, kind of precipitated a dialogue, or I don't know if you want to call it a dialogue. It precipitated some conversations. So I think this is one of the most salient things that has been said about diversity in games in a long time, and I repeat it often. When you decline to create or to curate a culture in your spaces, you're responsible for what spawns in the vacuum. To me, this is really the most important single idea that has been conveyed during the entire controversy around diversity over the past year or so. And I think it was actually, I'm surprised it hasn't been pointed out by more people. It's something that I've written about myself earlier, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about my history and my experience with this, just so you can sort of get a sense for my perspective on this. Before the sort of preamble of this slide is, before I actually got into academia, I actually worked in the video game industry, particularly in museums and theme parks. So I actually have an industry background, but in the late 1990s, I became engaged with academia and also got involved with curating. And the first exhibition that I co-curated was in 2003. It was called Alt Control, and it was at the Beale Center for Art and Technology at UC Irvine, where I was working at the time. Co-curated this with Robert Nidifer and Antoinette Lafarge. And this was a very early example in the US of a game art exhibition. So this was specifically games that were framed as fine art. We showed Sea Level, which was the collective that Ido Stern and Peter Brinson and Brody Condon founded. We showed work by Tale of Tales. We showed a number of very edgy kinds of game art pieces. And it was really as a direct result of this exhibit that I was invited to become part of Indiecade. I also co-founded a women's game collective with Tracy Fullerton, Janine Fraun, and Jackie Maury called Ludica. And in the 2000s, we wrote a series of papers, including a very famous one called The Hegemony of Play, which was very much about this point that Lee Alexander makes to do with the curation of culture. And in this article, we talked about the fact that the video game industry had constructed this idea of the gamer as a very narrow and to some extent a fictional marketing construct, that we actually observed that we really didn't know that many people that fit into this marketing construct in the narrow way that it's conveyed in the game industry. But we also felt like we compared it to some of the aspects of gender in games in the board game industry, and pointed out that the Victorian board game industry was actually more gender inclusive than the 21st century video game industry. We also wrote a paper for the book, a chapter for the book Beyond Barbie and Mortal Kombat, and hosted a series of workshops and events at various conferences such as DIGRA and SIGGRAPH. I also have worked as an anthropologist of online games, and I wanted to mention this because the work that I've done studying game communities has been really important for me in terms of understanding how communities operate. And the two communities that I studied primarily were refugees of the game Uru, which closed in 2003, and I wrote this book, Communities of Play. This was actually my PhD dissertation, which was transformed into a book. And I also studied a university, a player-run university within the virtual world, there.com. One of the most important things about these two communities that I studied was that they were almost entirely harassment-free. And I'm very interested in what was it about these games and these environments that that really created an environment that people did not have to worry about being harassed or gender exclusion or anything like that. It was actually a very inclusive and friendly environment that people felt quite comfortable in. In 2005, I started working on Indiecade with Stephanie Barish and Sam Roberts. Indiecade, for people who don't know, is an international festival and also a series of showcase events. We do our primary large festival, which takes place in the Los Angeles area in the fall and October. We then also have Indiecade East, which takes place in New York in February. And then we also do a showcase at E3 in May, which will be coming up, in June, which will be coming up in a couple of months. My prior academic position, so right around the time I joined Indiecade, I started working at Georgia Tech as a college professor, and I started something called the Emergent Game Group. The focus of that group was to create games that promoted emergent behavior. We used the work I had done studying emergent behavior on my PhD dissertation and the book that I wrote based on that and some of my other research. And we used that research to look at how we could create software that was helping to promote what we consider to be positive emergent behavior. We also looked at negative emergent behavior and tried to figure out how we could mitigate that with the design of our software. I also taught 2 classes there, game design as cultural practice. And this class was very much game design and game history, game culture through kind of a feminist lens. You can see on the left there, one of the core tests we worked with was The Birth of the Chess Queen, which is a feminist history of chess. What it does is it follows the game through all of its various trajectories from the point of view of the queen piece. I also taught students about the history of board games. On the lower right, people may recognize the Landlord's Game, which was the precursor to Monopoly, designed by a woman as actually a serious game in 1904, and also various other aspects of game culture in different societies, and then into video game design. I also taught a class which I'm currently teaching also at Northeastern called Experimental Game Design, and this class really focused on and focuses on the ways in which fine artists in avant-garde art movements have used games. So for 20th century avant-garde art in particular, but then in addition, we look at art games of the 21st century. In 2013, I co-curated this exhibition, XYZ, at the Museum of Design in Atlanta with John Sharp, Akira Thompson, and Cindy Poremba, all of whom are well-established both game artists and game designers, game artists, and curators. And the idea of this
excuse me, Celia, for a moment.
Yes.
Hi. It looks like we're not getting your slides on the stream.
Oh, has that been going on for a long time?
Yeah, sorry. I stepped out for a minute.
Are you just seeing me?
So it's showing the first slide in PowerPoint in the editor. So maybe the presentation opened on a new screen, which isn't the one that's presenting.
That's very odd. Okay, let me, so this whole entire time, none of those slides came through, is what you're saying?
Yeah, just the first one.
Okay, that's unfortunate because most of my slide show is done. So should I just start over or?
No, continue from where you were. Maybe just while you're talking about other things, bring out some of the other ones so we can get some context.
Well, I mean, I'm a little concerned because if you're not seeing it, then, okay. So you're not seeing that at all? Wait, hold on. Let me just see something.
Sorry, everybody, a little technical difficulties.
The problem is that you were texting me and I can't see that when I have the screen share on. So, hold on a second. Yeah, this is, I don't know what to do. I'm frustrated.
Okay, just continue with your talk. That's fine.
Well, yeah, the images were quite vital to what I was talking about, so I'm a little disappointed that they didn't come through.
Okay. If you would like to start over, we can do that, and then we'll edit out the start on YouTube. So the live stream will have a little bit of repeat. But
yeah, I mean, we tested this before and it worked fine, so I'm a little baffled as to why it's not working now. It says, okay, let me try this again. Can you talk to me while we're doing this so that we can get this working properly?
I'll stay here and make sure I get it okay.
Okay, so I've just hit the share button and there is my interface. You see that?
Okay.
You see the opening slide?
Yep,
okay, now if I do the slideshow, what do you see now?
I still see the editor.
I don't know what to do about this.
Okay, do you want to just select the slides in PowerPoint, not in presentation mode?
Okay.
There you go. Sorry about that.
Yeah, really irritating. Can you see it? So you're seeing it in the editor now, correct?
Yes.
Even though on my screen, it's not really sharing my screen. So it's basically sharing, oh, I see, okay. Let me just see something. Oh, that's super annoying. Yeah, I see what it's doing, and it's somehow it isn't really sharing my screen. It's lying to you about what it's doing. I'm just trying to find a way to make this look better than all the garbage on the screen because it doesn't. Okay, let me get rid of this. All right, that looks a little better. All right, I'm just going to walk through it then in the editor. Really irritating. Okay, I'll do this quick as I can.
Thank you very much.
So let's begin again. Lee Alexander. I'm just going to go through the slides quickly and just recap what I said rather than starting from scratch because we're going to run out of time. So to recap, my opening slide is the Lee Alexander quote from the Gamma Sutra article, "When you decline to create or to curate a culture in your spaces, you're responsible for what spawns in the vacuum." So this is the sort of key premise of my philosophy about curating for inclusivity. So Alt Control, this was an exhibition I co-curated in 2013 at UC Irvine. one of the first exhibitions of art games in the US. It was right around the time, actually, that some really cool stuff was happening at Acme, actually. There was also a show in Australia called Trigger that happened a couple of years before this that was very influential on us and what we were doing. In 2005, I joined some people, as I mentioned, Ludica, a women's game collective. We did events. We wrote some book chapters and some papers. This is the book, wrong screen. This is the book that I wrote based on my dissertation, and I mentioned that this has really been a big influence on me because so irritating. Because I did a lot of sociological research about communities and was able to learn the ways in which game software influences how communities are formed and how they're cultivated. We started Indiecade, and well, we really started working on it in 2006. The first festival was in 2008. And I mentioned we do our annual festival, our New York event, and then we also have a showcase at E3. And part of the premise of this talk was originally created for Indiecade East, and I was trying to explain the way in which Indiecade, at its very core, is designed to be inclusive. So we actually, up until now, have never had an inclusiveness statement because we haven't needed one. We deliberately and very carefully crafted our entire event and our entire culture, really, to be inclusive and inviting, and we're constantly refining and working on that very diligently. So we really started this from the inception as a goal of Indiecade to be inclusive. I mentioned I also have this research group at Georgia Tech. One thing I want to point out is this mermaids game that we did. This game, obviously, because it's about mermaids, is very different from a lot of other video games. The idea of it was essentially it's a game about environmental stewardship, really. And we were trying to develop a game that would promote emergent behavior. The other game here is a serious game about immigration. So that's more of a game, a historical game, and I did a number of projects. I'm very interested in games that take place in historical settings. I mentioned the class here, game design is cultural practice. This class is taught with a very feminist kind of orientation to it, even though the majority of the students who took this class were men. I felt it was really important for both men and women to get this perspective. This book, The Birth of the Chess Queen, which I mentioned earlier, is a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. A number of other instructors have adopted it. I've basically, evangelized it to everyone I know because it's a fabulous book, and it traces the history of the game of chess as it migrated through different cultures and talks about how the rules changed from the perspective of the queen piece. So it's really a wonderful book, and it really shows how cultures influence game mechanics and game representation in a really very nice and entertaining way. This is the class I mentioned, Experimental Game Design, which I'm now teaching at Northeastern. This is a class about fine art movements in games. And this is a really important one in terms of inclusiveness, again, because fine arts is a place where we have seen a very high percentage of women. And if you include fine arts in your purview, that tends to increase your female inclusiveness. This was actually one of the areas that I had some expertise in, which is what inspired Stephanie to invite me to participate in Indiecade. I wrote a paper in 2006, actually, about 20th century art movements and their relationship to contemporary art game practice. And finally, XYZ, this was an exhibition, as I mentioned. I co-curated this with John Sharp and Akira Thompson and Cindy Paremba in Atlanta. And the premise of this, which was originally conceived of by Akira, was to create an exhibition devoted to women game designers. This was the first time anyone had done this. There's a new exhibit that just opened in San Francisco, actually, a smaller exhibit that's also devoted to women game designers. But this, oddly, in 2013 was the first time anyone had ever done a show on this topic. We're now thinking about developing a new exhibition with a similar theme for touring. So I'm going to switch off the screen now and just go to video. Can you see me? Okay, I guess you can. I'm going to have to count on it. So what I want to do now is go through what I am putting together. I'm kind of working on and developing this iteratively, but originally gave this presentation at Indiecade East back in February, and it really arose out of discussions I've been having with people about the fact that we get a lot of feedback at Indiecade that we are very inclusive, and people feel comfortable and people feel safe at Indiecade, and we're very proud of this, and this is actually not an accident. It's actually something that we cultivate and have crafted into our culture from the very beginning. So what I thought I would do is kind of give people a little bit of an insight, and I should mention that this wasn't really codified. It wasn't like we had an inclusiveness policy or anything like that. It was just a goal that we set out for ourselves from the beginning, that we wanted to, we were going to these indie events, and one of the things that we were seeing a lot was we would go, for instance, to the Game Developers Conference or to other events, even when we first did E3, and you would see like serious games over here and casual games over here and mobile games over here, and in every one of those categories, there were indie games, but the indie game group was a separate group, and they didn't seem to include anyone out of a particular subset. So we were like, well, why aren't serious games indie games, and why aren't art games, which weren't even included at all in any indie festival when we started? We were the first people really to embrace art games. Why aren't these things, why don't they count? Why don't they count as indie? They all meet the qualifications. So you're seeing things now like the Novo Awards at the Independent Game Festival at the GDC, which are starting to acknowledge these other kinds of more edgy genres. But we were just right away like, hey, everyone can play as long as you're not working for a big studio with a marketing person telling you what to do, essentially. That's the short answer. So this is kind of my 12 steps to inclusiveness that I'm sort of crafting and putting together. So I'm just going to go through them one by one, and then we can have a little Q&A and discussion. So 12 steps to curating an inclusive culture. First, admit there's a problem. Problems do not go away just because you ignore them. People in a position of privilege do not have to think about people who aren't. It's very easy to be in a state of privilege and say, and I'm going to flip this slide on real quick so you can kind of see the gist of it here. I might bop back and forth. So basically, if you're in a position of privilege, one of the things that does for you is give you the luxury not to have to think about anyone else. If everything is about white guys and you're a white guy, you don't have to think about the fact that you're a white guy. This is actually well-tread territory. Simone de Beauvoir wrote about this in the 40s. Also, think about empathy. Employ empathy as a starting point. If you can't be empathic to a generalized group of people, then think about somebody you care about who is being mistreated and use that as your starting point. The thing to remember is we do not, by any stretch of the imagination, live in a post-racist, post-sexist society. Not at all. So the idea that we are past that is really quite naive, I think, and wrong-headed. Okay, next. We have step number 2, care. Care about people who are different from you. Even if you don't care, understand that diversity is good for everyone because it produces more ideas, more innovation, broader audiences, and ultimately more revenue. So even if you don't really care sincerely about diversity, there's actually a lot of research to show that it's good for the system. A little bit of empathy goes a long way. 3, Be willing to make sustained effort. So just caring isn't enough. You have to be willing to listen, make an effort, change, recalibrate, and reassess. Inclusiveness is an ongoing commitment. It's not a game that you can win. It's just something where you are constantly improving. There's always going to be new challenges introduced. It's not like you're going to be, okay, we're inclusive and we have no more work to do. There's always going to be room for more inclusiveness. 4, communicate. Listen and talk. Get feedback from people from diverse communities. Give feedback to people who care but might need some guidance. Don't shame people. Give them loving guidance. One of the things I've found is a really ongoing problem is that there are a subset of people who sincerely care about inclusiveness and really want to be part of the solution, but just don't know how. They are maybe used to being in a particular role in a particular situation. They don't have knowledge and information. So an example that I see a lot is a person I had this experience once with a friend who gave a wonderful presentation about art games and didn't mention any women. And when this was brought to his attention, he was mortified. But then what I did was I said, well, hey, here's some women artists you might want to know about. So when you present on this topic again, you will be better informed. So we can educate each other and we can help each other. I want to mention that I didn't, and I sometimes have a problem with this, but in that particular case, it wasn't brought up in a public context. It was discussed privately, and then resources and information were offered to help that person expand their repertoire in this area. Number 5, educate, also related to this topic. Educate yourself, educate others. Learn what terms like microaggression mean. A lot of people are not familiar with this term. I'm going to put this slide up just so you can see what I'm talking about here, because this has actually got some stuff in it that might be useful. This is microaggression is a term that comes out of race and ethnic studies. It basically refers to small indignities and digs and so forth. A classic one would be one I got many times early in my career is, you're smart for a woman, or you speak well for an African American, are classic. A form of microaggression that is experienced sometimes by people at Indiecade, particularly women, is that people will come up to a woman and ask her who she's there with. This is a problem. This happens at a lot of gaming events. There was a report a couple of years ago at E3 by women, especially women journalists, who would be looking at games that the demoers would take the mouse away from them and not let them actually play. Classic forms of microaggression. How do we understand this? How do we try to avert it? Other disciplines, such as the civil rights movement, feminism, and queer rights movements, have dealt with these things for many years, so we can learn from them and we can share some of the tools and resources that come out of those movements, and borrow from others who've been successful, and make a point to educate everyone and bring everyone into the conversation. The next, so now we're on, let's see, I think that was 5, yes. 6, put people, this is really important. I can't even emphasize this enough. Put diverse people and people who care in leadership roles. And when I say people who care, I have to say some of the best feminists I know and some of the strongest inclusiveness advocates I know are actually white guys who just care and they want to do better and they want to make our environment better. So when you do that, first of all, if you diversify leadership, you will inherently help avoid the problem of inclusiveness ghettos. And I'll give you an example of this. A couple of years ago, there was a conference that took place where I was living in Atlanta, and I looked at the program, and they didn't have a single female speaker on the entire program. And I wrote them and I said, hey, you should get some women to speak at your conference. And so what they did was they made a panel called Diversity, and they put me and the 3 other people of color that they could somehow find on this panel. So this idea of kind of inclusiveness ghettos, where it's like, let's put all the gay people on one panel, or let's put all the women in a panel called Gender and Games, which used to happen a lot. I actually coined this term people of gender because if you're at a games conference and there was a panel that had the word gender in it, only women would go because apparently men don't have a gender. So I think that the diversification of leadership is key here, because if you diversify leadership, then you don't even need a policy, because diverse leaders will automatically pick diverse participants. So this is something I'm constantly working on with Indicate, is making sure that we have really good representation and expand the embrace of, and I don't just mean people's ethnic or gender background, but also their disciplinary background. And this kind of leads to a couple of other points. 7, inclusivate your systems. What does this mean, inclusivate your systems? I'm going to give you a couple of examples about what I mean by this. When I was working in the emerging game group at Georgia Tech, one of the things that happens a lot in a large group setting is that certain types of people tend to dominate. Men tend to dominate. Also, people from certain cultures tend to be less aggressive and assertive in conversation. And so what I implemented was, I implemented something we call the talking stick. And what that was we had a projector cable, and we would plug the projector cable in to, each person would get the projector cable. We would basically pass it around, and then they would plug it into their computer and present the work that they had done over the past week. Other people that I know, one of my former students, Clara Fernandez, has a similar technique. She has a doll that her students pass around, and when they're holding the doll is when it's their turn to speak. Gender neutral restrooms is something that is always good if you can include them, because they just make people who have non-standard gender identities or non-binary gender identities, they give them a little more room and a little more sense of inclusiveness. And also just the idea of iterating. Like, I think it's really important to be aware that systems create culture. And so if your systems are not conducive to inclusiveness, then even if you have a policy, it's not going to help your situation with diversity. Number 8, be careful what you privilege. I have to say that this is one of the most important principles that I've been talking to people about, because when I gave this talk at Indicate, a guy stood up at the end of my talk and said this blew his mind, this slide. So something we don't really think about is what we privilege. Privileging certain things, certain disciplines, certain words, certain discourses automatically privileges certain people. The most glaring example of this in the game industry is the privileging of coding over art. If you look at salaries and you look at even conferences, people that write code are paid more, are treated better, are somehow considered smarter in some way or better than people who make art. Now, if you look at the demographics, what you discover is that you see more women in art than in coding. So by doing that, you're automatically gendering your value system, because you're going to find more men coding than doing art, and more women doing art than coding. By leveling the value of those two areas, all of a sudden you're leveling the inclusiveness of the people doing them. Another area is serious games versus entertainment. I mentioned this conference earlier where I was put on the diversity panel. As I was walking with my fellow panelists to the conference room, I turned to them and I said, nobody is going to come to this panel. You know that, right? And they all laughed. We went to the panel. There were about 6 people there. All of them were the women and people of color at the conference. And what we did was, I said, you know what? I know where everybody is. There's a serious game session going on right now. And we got up, I made everybody get up out of the room and walk into the serious game session. And lo and behold, there were all the people of gender and color. So this makes me really realize that if you privilege entertainment over serious games or over educational games or over other sorts of games, another example is hardcore games versus casual games. People will say, oh, Angry Birds isn't a real game. And that brings up my third, which is who owns the definition of game? So that's just an example, but the terms we use and the way we privilege those terms automatically has an effect on diversity. And it's something people really are not aware of, but all of these things become an encoded way to include or exclude certain people. So we are moving on now to number 9. Also very much related to my last point. Invite communities and practices that are already diverse to yours. So again, when I was working in academia at UC Irvine, I noticed this interesting thing, which is if I was in the engineering department, I would be seeing mostly guys. But if I walked across there was a big park in the middle of campus. If I would walk across the park and go to the education department, where they had an educational games class, most of the people there were women. So wandering outside of your comfort zone and finding where the diverse communities already are. Look for them. Where are the women? Where are the people of color? Where are the people of different cultures? Where are the people of different genders and sexual persuasions? Find them. Where are they already? And then invite that community. Not, hey, you know, a great example is Twine, right? The Twine community has a very high representation of LGBTQ people in it. By acknowledging and accepting a game engine like Twine as a legitimate game creation platform, which honestly is something that I think the mainstream indie scene wouldn't have done 10 years ago. By embracing that platform, you automatically embrace the community that comes with that platform. I think that we also have really evolved the term indie now to include serious games, casual games, art games, educational games, games made by academics in the context of research labs, big games, and also board games and other kinds of games that are not necessarily digital games. This is another area where we see greater inclusiveness as you open up your technological constraints, using things like RPG Maker and Twine, or creating games that are purely physical, also expands your community. And my sort of slogan here is the more the merrier. Why, you know, it doesn't hurt anyone to have more people involved. Include and acknowledge. This is number 10. Include diverse. So this is actually, again, something that really gets overlooked a lot. And let me just pop my screen up here again so you can see this slide. So here we have, this is a big problem that I see happening a lot, is I'm going to give a talk about game design, or I'm going to give a talk about game scholarship, or I'm going to give a talk about art games. And I give a talk and then I never mention anybody that isn't a white guy. Of course, I wouldn't do this, but a lot of people have this problem. And it's not because they aren't there. And I've heard this a million times. I've heard people go, we couldn't find any women game designers. That's just crap. There's plenty of women game designers out there. Also, when you're making games, include diverse characters. Think about, does this have to be a white man? Could this be a woman of color, or a person of a different sexual persuasion, or somebody with a different ability? My students have actually done some really interesting things around making ambiguous characters. Like one of my students a couple of years ago, a team made a game where the main character was a mummy. And they said, hey, we don't have to worry about gender or race because it's a mummy. It was great. Another great example is Journey. The character in Journey is totally, it's a humanoid character, but its race and gender are ambiguous. In other games, this is done by simply not having human representation. You see this in a game like Flower, or you see this in a number of other games where the characters are more abstracted. And also avoid inadvertently making people invisible. This is something that's really easy to do just by making a remark where you don't consider. I actually heard someone say something. I was at a comedy show the other day, and a guy made an obscene joke, but he was clearly addressing only the straight people in the room. And then he made an afterthought about the gay people in the room, but it was interesting that he just chose to focus on that audience. Okay, number 11. We're almost done, and then we can have a conversation. Number 11, encourage your community to monitor itself. This is really important, and it's something we're working on now. So as I mentioned earlier, Indicate doesn't have, we don't have an inclusiveness policy. We don't have anything written up right now. We have an inclusive culture, which we've cultivated, and we really have never had any serious problems or there's never been any harassment. As I mentioned, there have been there's some forms of microaggression that take place. But by and large, our community, people come to us and they tell us that they feel safe and they feel very much loved and appreciated at Indicate events. And that's a culture that we continue to want to cultivate. And even as we've scaled up from 30 people in one room in 2008 to this massive public event that takes place on the streets of Los Angeles every year, we still manage to maintain this quality. And one way that we do that is that the people that work with us, the chairs of the different aspects, and like the people that run the Indicate East event, our volunteers, our staff, people take responsibility for maintaining that environment. And we really want to continue to empower people to do that. And that's something we're working on for next year, of trying to develop a method or a system of having ambassadors, but also having just everybody in the community take care of each other. I mean, that's a really simple way to put it, is let's take care of each other. And finally, I'm going to put this last slide up. This is the 12th step to creating an inclusive community. And this got a good chuckle out of the Indicate East audience. But, just don't be an asshole. I know that sounds like it goes without saying, but in the last year or so, maybe not. It seems like there are people out there who love being assholes for some reason. I'm not really sure why. But, not being an asshole can really go a long way. And finally, I want to share with you this slogan that I've adopted for the last couple of years, because I feel like, and I talked about this in our panel, free play panel on Saturday, that, is it Saturday? Saturday, yeah. That because it's an event that really is organized by a community of people, most of Indicate is run by volunteers and people that, since the very beginning of our conference, have stepped up and wanted to be involved. And those people have really taken it to heart that we want to be a diverse and inclusive environment. I need to particularly acknowledge John Sharp, who's been our conference co-chair for, oh my God, ever. I think he's been doing this for now 5 or 6 years. I think we gave him an award last year for his 5th year of conference co-chairing, but he is a person who has taken a lot of responsibility for assuring that we have an inclusive participation of speakers and visibility of diverse people. Our Indicate East chairs have also been absolutely brilliant about this, and continue to enhance that and expand that. So really proud of our community and the fact that they've been able to create and maintain this wonderful, diverse culture. And I think that's a really important aspect. I think that if you maintain control, if management is very highly centralized, there's a much greater risk of erring. And I've seen this with more corporate conferences where there's just one or two people in charge. If two or three people, especially people who are kind of in a narrow discipline or a narrow demographic group, are just controlling everything, that's a recipe for disaster. The more people that you have participating in the community and building the events together, the more you're going to have the checks and balances that you need, because somebody is going to say, and this happens every year, somebody will say, hey, well, what about this? Stephanie has been really on top of thinking about, hey, we don't have enough game makers from Latin America. We don't have enough game makers from Asia. We don't have enough. How can we bring in people from other regions and make our event more international? Various ways that we do this is by providing submission coupons, which is something easy that we can do, low-hanging fruit. We also have a very limited travel subsidy program that's basically funded by private individuals who give us some funds every year that people can apply for grants to help get them to indicate. But we're always trying to do things like this to widen our reach and enhance our inclusiveness on whatever level that we can. So that's it for my talk. And now we're into the discussion Q&A period. I was budgeting about an hour, but we can actually have that conversation for longer than that if people want to continue talking about it. So I'm going to open it up for questions now, and I think we're going to, yes, if you would like to ask me a question, you can tweet to hashtag freeplay15. Is that correct? Am I getting that right? Yes, hashtag freeplay15 is the place to send your questions. Does anyone from the Free Play team have any questions they want to kick it off with, or you can type it in there or speak to me with your voice. No? Oh, okay. I want to ask, actually, I want to bring up a question to you, maybe, because I think it's one that comes up a lot in these kinds of contexts. I think that an area that we could all really grow in is how to bring in more Indigenous and Aboriginal peoples into our community. Last year we showed Never Alone, which is an interesting example of a kind of a new methodology for creating games. I have worked with a group in Canada called Aptech Skins, which I've yet to get them to indicate, sadly, but I've tried pretty much every year. They are First Nations artists working in Canada to develop new vocabularies and ways of thinking about what does native gaming look like, and native virtual worlds, and etc. I remember working with them early on in Second Life. They wanted to do a project there, and right away they were really taken aback by the whole idea of owning real estate, which is a big part of virtual worlds, and that was really something that rubbed them the wrong way. Great. Oh, perfect. So she's just saying games and Indigenous culture. There was a games and Indigenous culture panel that's archived on Free Play's YouTube channel. Fantastic. That's really wonderful. Yeah, so I think that we can, as a community, we can invite those conversations, but we can also think about, again, how can we create structures and methods to include people from Indigenous communities? We are working on it now. So the question is there a concern that having no written inclusivity policy is a potential problem if something happens in the future? Absolutely, in fact. So basically, where we are right now with this is that nobody ever really talked to us about this until this last year, and then now we're getting all these questions about it. And so essentially what happened was right before Indicate East, there were some tweets about where's our inclusiveness statement, and I said, well, you know what, we don't have one. We haven't really needed one up until now, but we now recognize that we need one. So we are in the process. I've formed a committee of different people. That includes the founder of GamerX, the founder of Different Games, and a couple of other people that have a lot of experience with this. And what we're doing is we're actually going to be we have 2 initiatives we're working on right now. This is a work in progress, but this is kind of, just where we are with things. The first thing we're going to do is create a statement of values. So I don't really want to make people sign a contract, which is something that some conferences do and I think has its place depending on the venue. I don't want, especially because it's so big and open to the public, it's not a small intimate event like Different Games where it's really, you can have those conversations and really take the time to work through those things with people. Instead, I think we need to get across to the general public that we have values and what those values are. So what we were talking about doing is drafting a very succinct and brief statement of values that goes on all of our badges so that anyone who has a ticket to Indiecade gets that value statement right up front. It's not on a website somewhere where you have to find it. It's not a 20-page contract that you have to sign. It's a very simple statement that says, hey, we value inclusiveness and we treat each other with respect. Very straightforward, simple, few words. And the idea of that is that we basically ask people that once they join our community, that while they're part of our community, they respect our values. I'll answer that question in 1 minute as soon as I'm answering this one, done answering this one. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is we're thinking about developing a volunteer program of ambassadors. So those would be people that would get a special training, would have some inclusiveness guidelines to work with, and they would essentially monitor the event and pay attention to what's going on. So for instance, I had an experience a couple of years ago where some people were playing Killer Queen Arcade, which is a wonderful game. It was a bunch of 13-year-old boys, and they were using pejorative terms. They were basically calling each other gay in a way that was, clearly meant to be an insult. And I basically just stuck my head in the tent and said, oh, we don't talk to each other like that at Indiecade. Thank you very much. So those are kind of some of the things that we're working on. Okay, there's a couple of questions queued up here. The next question is, what do you see as the effect of marginalized group-focused conferences such as GamerX on making spaces inclusive? I think that these focus conferences with different subgroups, GamerX is a great example, Different Games is another one, are great. And the reason I think they're great is that I think there is a place for people in different marginalized subgroups to get together and, first of all, bond, share common interests, support each other. One of the things that's really, really important is visibility. If I see somebody who looks like me making games, that empowers me and makes me feel like I can make games too. This is a problem for a lot of young women game designers. It's one of the reasons I think it's important to have female instructors, for instance, is that if a girl comes to my class and her teacher is a woman, that sends her a message that she can be a game designer or a game instructor. And I feel the same way about other, I want to see people on stage that have different genders and different skin colors because I want anybody who sits in that audience to know that there's a place for them. I think it's really important. Also, Indiecade has a wonderful partnership with GamerX, and last year we did a showcase that was sponsored by Cards Against Humanity. We collaborated with them on it, and we did this really cool game showcase where we just basically picked games that weren't necessarily queer games, but were just games that we felt like were synergistic and harmonious with the GamerX agenda. So it was great. We had, I don't know, maybe about eight or 10 games that we showed. And it was, we showed Depression Quest, for instance, was one of the games. And it was just a nice opportunity for us to kind of a gesture of solidarity and support for that community, which, indicate as we have a lot of people in the queer games and LGBTQ game scene, and we just, again, we embrace all voices because we feel like, hey, everybody's point of view is valuable. And I think that it's funny, I'm working on, I just put in a proposal for an exhibition on queer games that's taking place in France over the summer, and I wanted to give, I said, I want to give a talk called Why Queer Games Matter by a straight, white, cis woman, because they matter to me. And the reason they matter to me is because they bring new perspectives and new ideas to the table that enhance our field as a whole. I think a game like Dysphoria, it's not just that it's about changing the gender, because that's a very compelling way to tell that story. But it's also a really great way to tell any story. I think Anna introduced us to a new way to think about how to convey an experience through game mechanics, and whether or not whoever story you're telling, it suddenly opens up a whole new way of expressing yourself through a game. So I think just in the way that in the arts and in film, and in other domains, new voices also give us new ways of thinking and new ways of seeing that benefit everyone. Okay, next question from Twitter. I feel games has a tendency of eating other disciplines. How best to prevent absorption and encourage equal engagement? Wow, that is a really good question. And it is really tricky. So I'm actually sort of in favor of games eating other disciplines in a way, because I'm going to go back for a minute to, this is a kind of a personal story, but it very much relates to this. So I started working in games in the 1980s. My first job started in 1983. And at that point, we called what we were doing games, and we were designing games for like museums and nightclubs and venues like that. But what we were doing was really interactive media. And it didn't really have a name yet. It was 1983. We were working with Laserdisc and physical interfaces and all kinds of weird stuff. But we use the term game as a kind of a shortcut because it was just the easiest. It was the closest thing to what we were doing, essentially. About a decade later, I moved back to Los Angeles, where I was originally from, and I went to the first E3 convention. And this was a really interesting moment, like 1994, 5 in there, early to mid 90s. And at that point, there were actually a bunch of things going on that weren't calling themselves games. There was interactive cinema, CDI, and DVI, and all these other formats that were more media rich and less gamey. They were less twitchy. They were less arcadey. And those were all at that time sort of up for grabs at that point. This was primarily in the consumer end of things. And what ended up happening really was that games won. Games became the mass medium of interactive media. And I think that this is kind of problematical, actually. But what we did with IndieCade was there was one of the things we put in the IndieCade jury guidelines. First off, and I said this to Stephanie, I said, the most important point I want to make to the jurors is that I never want to see this is rejected because it's not a game. This infuriates me. And because who is it up to decide whether or not something is a game? And there are people that I know who make things that they won't call games, or you can hear Arya Harvey and Mikhail Salmon always say, well, we make non-games or not games. But I mean, this is the same tradition of, the Dadaists who made anti-art or not art. I think that who makes those decisions about what's called a game is very politicized. And I think that this has really come up in the last year with the idea of what a gamer is as well. So I think that people using terms like playable media and playful media and interactive media is kind of somewhat coming back, although nobody really likes that term, I think, by and large. But I mean, I guess in a way it's problematic to sort of force people to wear the game mantle, but at the same time, by doing that, we get to be more inclusive. So it's kind of a trade-off. I mean, there have been things in IndieCade which don't call themselves games, but I think in the long run, we really consider our purview to be more one about playable and interactive media than the G word per se in that sense. Okay, next question. As a physical event, this is another Twitter question. I wish you would put in the Twitter handles of people so I could say, so-and-so asks blah, blah, blah. So another Twitter participant says, as a physical event, how do you deal with the effects of the tyranny of distance on diversity, expenses, travel, etc.? Oh, of course. Brendan Keogh, hi, thank you. Yes, well, this is really, really, really hard and painful and agonizing, and it causes me to rend my clothes because I live in America, which is a horrible place that has no public funding for the arts. For those of you who live in Australia or Canada or Europe, it's very tragic, the situation here. We just don't have any money. We have no public money. We are kind of hosed in that respect. So what we do with the travel is that we have essentially a way for people to submit a request for travel support. We have private donors, literally individual people that are successful indie game developers who write us checks every year. And then we have small travel subsidies, usually like $200, depending on the person. Sometimes if it's a special case, we might provide a little bit more. They have to essentially put in a request or an application for it. The other thing we do is that we try to set up we try to set up lodging situations, and we've actually done this a couple times where we've gotten us sponsored. So we'll get an Airbnb house with 5 bedrooms or something like that, and get a sponsor for that. We've done that a couple of times. We also do a whole networking thing behind the scenes where we will essentially find people sofas to sleep on. It's very hands-on. We kind of know everybody, so especially in LA, since we're very well connected there, we can just, the indie developers in LA are wonderful, and they'll house people from all over the world. So it's really very much it takes a village. It takes a village to get people to IndieCade, really big time. When we were at IndieCade East, yeah, there was a situation there where we rented a house near the festival where some of the staff stayed, and also some of the developers who were coming from other locations crashed there. So, and people just help each other out. I mean, it's a very generous community. People are very, they drive each other. It's just, everybody's just loves helping each other out. It's pretty cool. I even I had some former students from Atlanta who came to IndieCade East, and they crashed on the sofa in our rental there. So that was actually pretty fun. All right. Oh, the previous question was from Harry Lee, the one about the term games. Yeah, that's a tough one, man. It causes my soul to ache, the whole games, non-games, interactive media definition-y thing. I mean, I think the bottom line with that is it doesn't really matter what you call it. The whole point of IndieCade was we wanted people to see cool shit. We were seeing all this great stuff in very gated environments like the Game Developers Conference. And we were like, you know what? We want the public to be able to see these things. So that's really the bottom line. And what you call it is less important than the fact that you are giving access to it. Anyone else? Any other questions from the Twitter sphere? It's very weird talking to like text and not having an audience. Hopefully, I mean, I guess there's an audience there because people are asking questions, but it's a little odd not to, yeah. I did a talk last year to a bunch of junior high school students in like Indiana or something, and it was cool because they had kind of a Twitch style text feed running the whole time I was talking. So like I'd say Minecraft, and then the kids would be like, Minecraft, she said Minecraft, yay! So it's a little, you know, I guess I could look at the Twitter feed myself, couldn't I? I didn't even think of that. I guess there's not a lot going on with that. I should have tweeted that I was giving this talk, huh? I never think to do that. I'm really bad with Twitter. I'm not very Twitter savvy, I must say. Play 15. Let's see. Oops, I wrote fee play. There we go. Let's see. I can see, oh, people retweeting stuff I said. That's great. Okay, let's see what else. Yeah, all right. I guess that's it then. I mean, it's a little after 9. I think we'll get on time. Yeah, and thanks for everybody that came and listened to me, and for the really nice, challenging questions. Those were really good questions. So have fun, free play. I wish I could be there with you guys in Melbourne. Acme is like a mecca to me, and I hope someday to go there for something. Maybe we can bestow ourselves upon the largesse of the Australian government and get me a plane ticket next year. That would be sort of cool if we can figure that out. Get my atoms over there instead of just my bits. Wait, maybe I shouldn't have said that. I just realized what I said anyway. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, free play. I love free play. Oh, any current thing I want to plug? Yes. Oh my God. Indicate submissions are live. We have 2 upcoming submissions deadline. May 1st is the submissions deadline for. Oh, good. May 1st is the regular submissions, and that is for Indicate and also for E3. So you are eligible to be curated into E3 if you submit by May 1st. And then the late deadline, which has an additional charge, so there's a slightly higher fee, is June 1st. Submit your games and or non-games, if you want to call them that. And hopefully we'll see you in October. Take care. Bye for now.